Hey y'all, I want to make a video on some of the more challenging M3 problems. This is probably the hardest at Newton of the course, just in terms of the number of things you're doing, and Excel is a big part of this, and there's some nuance here. So I brought two questions over. I'm going to show you how I would approach these, and then we'll talk a little bit about some nuance. So 1, 2, 3. I've already got the table set up in Excel here. There's things that are filled in, 3,000. The new purchase is always going to be 95. So this is similar to the workbook. I do equals 95, and I'm going to run that down the table. The payment is always 250. I'm going to go ahead and do equals 250 and run that down the table. So I'm using autofill to bring down those hard values by starting with an equal sign. If you start with 95 and you don't do the equal sign, you may get 95, 96, 97. It just kind of depends on how you're autofilling and which program you're using, Google Sheets, Excel. So the first math we need to do is the finance charge. And of course, the finance charge is just the balance. I'm referencing, instead of typing, 3,000, 17.99%. And then I need to divide by 12 or multiply by 1/12. This is basically simple interest. I did make a little typo here that I'm seeing before I pressed enter. So that's nice, right? Generally, before I press enter, I kind of go back and I look at what I did. So this is good. Times 17.99%. Checking the problem again. And I feel good about this. So 44,975. Now, this needs to be rounded to money. And so typically I can just take this whole section and make it money. Now, the ending balance then becomes this plus, this plus this plus this. Of course, the order doesn't really matter in addition, but I'm just kind of adding them in order. All right. And then the payment comes over and we do this minus the payment. And now we're sitting at this new balance here, this carryover balance. One of the things that's nice about these problems is that they do give you check-ins, so you can kind of see that you're on the right track. I'm going to go ahead and autofill this down. Now my finance charge is lower because my carryover balance is lower. And then this should be lower. Okay, now this is a sign that I got a problem here. And this happens sometimes with Excel when we're doing this, because what's actually happening, even though I formatted this all as money and I'm seeing the rounded figures, I'm not doing the math with rounded figures, because this number here is actually, I'm going to switch the format just so you can see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. This 44.98 is actually not 44.98. It's actually, well, I can just give you more decimals. It's 44,975. And so that penny of rounding looks like it's happening, but it's not actually happening. So this is a sign, the check-in is a sign that I need to make adjustments. Now, this isn't what I would do in my workbook, but for the purposes of Newton and getting this right, I'm going to change this to 44.98 because that's what it should be. And now I'm on track again with this one. And just to be safe, I might go through and sort of retype all of these. I don't really need to here because now this one is rounded. I've rounded it myself. And so this one will be rounded. And so this is the next one where that's going to come up. So if I look at extra decimals, I can see, oh yeah, there is some extra stuff happening here. This should be 43.33. And so I can change that in order to make sure that I'm aligned here. So it's really in the finance charge that's going to happen in this particular question, because that's where you get things that are not whole number, not whole cents. You get decimal values of cents, and Excel looks like it's rounding it, but it's not really rounding it. So the check-ins there are really important, right? And the check-in is provided in all these problems at different points. And so you want to make sure when you hit that point, you're like, oh, I'm good. I wouldn't just do the whole table the way I normally would in the workbook. The way we've talked about is just like, write the formulas out and then let's just autofill the whole table and be done. I want to kind of proceed step by step, because when I get to that point, I want to make sure I'm on the right track. So these last two are actually given to me, but I can see that I'm doing this right because that's correct. And then I can bring this Well, I can't autofill now, so I should just do this calculation again, times 17.99%. I don't mind you having to retype this a couple of times because it's really helping you remember, like get the muscle memory, the finance charge. That's one of the key things that we want to be able to do. This guy we can bring down, and so that I know the last answer that I need to fill in, and I'm ready to fill out the table. These are hard questions for the reason I just talked about, but also because there's actually 8 answers. And if you get one of them wrong, the whole thing is wrong. So there's a lot of precision involved here and attention to detail. I think that, to me, that's one of the things that you're gaining from this experience is practice with Excel, but also paying attention to detail. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the next question. And in this question, that rounding issue comes up again, but it's definitely going to have an impact on the answer. And if you don't think about the rounding, you're going to get this wrong. So we got a mortgage, we got 6.25% interest, we got 15 years. How much total interest? I'm going to write down some sub questions that need to be addressed, which is how much was the monthly payment? And how much was paid total over the life of the loan? And then finally, I can answer the question, how much interest was paid over the life of the loan? So we've talked a little bit about sub-questions. This is a great example of where the sub-questions really guide my process in thinking about what I need to do. How much was the monthly payment? That's going to be PMT. How much was paid over the life of the loan? This is simple multiplication. And the reason is, if you take a simpler, similar problem, it'll make sense. Like, let's say you agree to pay me $5 a month for a year. Well, how much are you going to pay me over the course of that payment process? Well, $5 every month, 5 plus 5 plus 5. But we know when we do this addition repeatedly, we should just multiply 5 times 12. So the Carsons are paying some amount. We don't know what it is. Say it's $500. They're doing that every month for 15 years. So then it becomes a multiplication problem to figure out how much they paid total. And finally, if we figure out that the total they paid was, say, $300,000, but the mortgage was $268,900, then we can figure out how much was interest. It's just subtraction, because we know that what they paid total was more because they had to pay that extra fees, those interest fees. And so we can figure out the total of the interest fees by just doing a little subtraction. All right, let's do it. And let's talk about where this goes wrong. PMT. And of course, I start with my interest rate. Don't forget to divide by 12. I'm going to put in my years, and then I'm going to do 268,900. Okay. Okay. This looks a little weird. $18,000 a month. That's a lot of money. I need to go back and I need to look at my formula, right? Don't just take your answers and say, okay, I'm moving on to the next step. You want to reflect. Does the answer make sense? Yeah, this middle number is a problem because 15 years is true, but this is a monthly process. And so I need to bring in the 15 times 12 to make this into a actual monthly situation. That sounds better. That doesn't sound great, but again, if you're renting, a multiple bedroom place, you could be spending at least that much on rent every month. So this is kind of a housing cost that's not a ridiculous amount. So now I can move on to the next question, which is how much was paid over the life of the loan? Now I could break this into another sub question, which is, well, how many payments were made? Because that is not given to me. I need to figure that out. Well, I did it for 15 years and I did it every month. So I think it's interesting how I always like to make this about myself. The Carsons did this every month for 15 years. So they should be doing, now I'll give you a second to think about it, so I'm not just filling in your thought process. 15 times 12. It should be every month for 15 years. 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12. That's just 15 12s, or 15 times 12. Of course, 12 times 15 is the exact same thing. 180, that's my sub question. And now I'm ready to do the math to do this. Now check this out. This is where things get weird. But actually, what I said in the last thing is the reason for this difference. So using a cell reference, which I generally think is the right thing to do, I'm going to take the 180 and I'm going to multiply by the 2305.61. All right, this is the answer I got. Now, typing in values to do process. All right, this is generally what I try to get you not to do, because I'm like, hey, you already have the value sitting there. So why would you type in the thing again? There's a chance you might make a mistake. All right. Notice that this is off by 18 cents. It's very, very close to the same answer, but it's 18 cents different. Why would it be different if I use a cell reference? Oh, sorry. It's not 18 cents different. They were rounding to the nearest dollar. Now we're rounding to the nearest cent. It's 2 cents difference. Why would it be different if I use a cell reference versus if I do the typed in values? Well, the answer lies in the PMT formula, because the PMT formula gives us this exact number that makes it work perfectly. And you saw that in mortgage and larger loans 1, if you did it properly, because the 674.14 payment should end up hitting exactly 0 by the time you do 240 payments. And the only reason that happens is because if you look behind the wheel here, behind the under the hood, there's more decimals out here. There's a lot more decimals out here. This is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, but over 180 times, it adds up to a difference of 2 cents. So what Knewton is looking for in this situation, and I dare say that the reality is probably closer to this, although then, it ends up being slightly different at the end. But these are pennies we're talking about, so nobody really thinks about it when they do the amortization. This is the answer that Knewton is looking for. This step in the process, the total paid over the life of the loan, is going to be the 2305.61 times 180. So it's the typed in version that's important here, because I need to do the rounding. Now, if you want to be really fancy, you could have put a rounding on top of this. So there's a way to do a rounded version. So if you really like cell references, you're like, I don't want to stop doing cell references. Here's how you do it. You do round, and then you take the number in, and then you say, I want this many decimal places. So now when I multiply these two numbers, the 2305.61 times the 180, I will get the same answer as I was supposed to get. So this is a way to use cell references, but put it through a little rounding process so that when you get the answer out, it's exactly what it should be. Now I'm ready to subtract. I got the 415,00980, and I'm subtracting the 268,900, and so the interest is $146,000. And by the way, this is legit. Like, when you borrow a lot of money, you pay a lot of interest unless you get that thing paid off quickly or you have a very low interest rate. And so this is a part of home ownership that is just a reality, that you're going to pay a lot of interest to the bank. And so that's part of the challenge of thinking about, do I rent? Do I buy? If you can afford to buy, is it the right thing to do? So there's a lot of complexity there. We don't really talk about that in the course, but I do want to highlight that this comes with high fees to the bank, and the bank is generally doing pretty well here with their mortgages. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to get this uploaded and shared, and give me more questions. And you see things in Knewton that don't make sense or you're struggling with, let me know. I'm here to help.